Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Hope you've all had your Weetabix and you've all, I guess, taken off your coats and put them under the hand dryers to try and dry them off. Honestly, thanks for braving the rain to be here this early in the morning. I can't say I would have done the same for you. I'd probably be at home watching the stream. So I respect you very much. Thanks so much. It is getting pretty torrential out there, isn't it? It's pretty bad. So thank you very much for coming, especially those of you who went to the party yesterday. So this is the title of my talk. It's called Dreaming of Intersectionality, and it's the crafting of the world of Desta, The Memories Between, which is the latest game we've put out at ustwo Games. Came out, I was going to say last month, but September. I forgot October existed. That month went by very quickly, but I digress. First of all, who am I? That's me and some of the team members here. I'm Mike Anderson. I'm Mike A. I believe the last talk yesterday was by Mike B, just to make it clear. I'm a producer at ustwo Games, and I've actually been there for 10 years now. Yesterday was literally my 10th year anniversary, so I've been at this company for a decade. Yeah. So they haven't fired me yet. They haven't found I've been embezzling funds just yet. Oops. Anyway, and so yeah, what do I do as a producer? This is a photo from the before times when things weren't done all digitally. So my post-its nowadays are way more digital and way more on Miro. If anyone's ever heard of Miro, that's a very good tool. Can you get some love for Miro real quick? Amazing tool. You should definitely use that. And so my role as a producer at ustwo Games is a lot about helping teams work efficiently, effectively. I'm a big advocate of working smart, not hard, so I try and encourage my teams to kind of be as lazy as possible and just sort of make sure they have all the tools they need. Sometimes that just means reminding everyone to drink water, and this is not a joke. If you ask my team, I'm constantly reminding them to drink enough water. Sometimes I get to be on stages and talking to lovely people such as yourselves, and over the decade I've been at ustwo Games, we've put out a bunch of interesting games. I guess the most popular two being the Monument Valley series. Anyone seen these games or played them before? Awesome, nice. So yeah, these are probably the games that kind of made our name as a studio. I've not started my timer, so I don't know how good I'm doing on time. My bad. We also put out a game called Assemble with Care on Apple Arcade. One of our writers is in the crowd there. AD, want to give everyone a wave? Hey, AD wrote a lot of the game, and I was involved in bringing that to Steam, which was the first PC release for the studio. Following that, I was also a producer on Alba, a wildlife adventure. This is going really well, thanks guys. And now I'm going to talk to you about Desta, basically. Oh wait, sorry, forgot to mention the side hustle. Outside of work, I'm also a founding member of the Pock and Play crew, along with some lovely people. I've got Des over there, Moo's there. Is Shella here? No? Was she at the party? That's okay. And so we're an independent organization who just basically we're doing our best to try and improve the visibility and representation of people of color in the games industry. And we all somehow manage to do this as well as our full-time jobs. It's pretty intense. And so I digress. Let's get back onto the main show. What am I here to talk to you all about? I mentioned it before. It's Desta, The Memories Between. But what is Desta, The Memories Between? So try and keep up with me here. It's a character-driven, turn-based tactics game with roguelike elements centering around a metaphorical dodgeball-esque ball game. And hopefully that makes sense. If not, it's fine. It is early, and I know some of you probably hungover, but I have, if this works, and some of you saw me do my little Rick Astley test to check that you'd actually be able to get the sound of this, I'm going to play you a quick gameplay video. Like, the focus of my talk will be about the narrative, but this will just hopefully help contextualize how things work in the sort of second-to-second gameplay of the game. So hopefully this works, and I also can put on the subtitles, and it should please work, please just work.
I keep having the weirdest dreams about my hometown.
Wait, so I'm going to make it bigger. If it wants to get bigger. It thinks it's full screen. Oh no. Is that size okay for people? Can you all see that? Okay, cool.
I've not been back there in 2 years. Not since Dad's memorial. Now Mum's trying to sell the place. I can't find the words to reach her. Dad would know what to say. He used to have us throw this ball back and forth to work out our problems.
So you came back, Desta, after all this time?
You can't just show up and expect everything to be normal. I'm sorry. I should have kept in touch. I've imagined these conversations in my head 100 times. But I think I'm working my way through it.
Well, if it isn't Desta. Sleeping in class again.
Have I had it all wrong?
You look like you could use a friend right now.
I can't keep running. I've got to find the right words. All these dreams. Let's see how far they take us.
Cool? Oh, thanks. Sweet. Thank you. So hopefully that made the previous slide make a bit more sense. So in a way, like this was a slide I prepared in case the video didn't play with audio, but the game in a nutshell is, this is the basic game loop. Desta falls asleep each night, and when they do, they enter a dreamlike world, which is populated by their memories, similar to, I guess, Inception, in the way that like your subconscious is how you populate like the world that the architects have created. While you're in there, you're attempting to resolve these conflicts by playing this dodgeball game, which we use as a metaphor for conversation. And I think to use another film reference, similar to, I guess, The Matrix, using martial arts as a metaphor for like interacting with the computer, hacking, I guess. That's how it works, right? They weren't actually beating up like bits of code, I assume. And so if they're unable to resolve these conflicts, they'll wake up. So basically, if you lose the game, you wake up and you have to start again. And that's where the roguelike elements of the game play in. And if that still doesn't make sense, to be honest, folks, it's out now and it's free on Netflix Games. I think people aren't aware Netflix has games, but if you have a smart device, iPhone, a tablet, an Android device, you can just get the game now and play it, and it'll make more sense if you give it a go. Please do, and if you want to give a 5-star review, that's great too. So, I mean, who is Desta? This is how Desta looks visually as a sort of game asset, as a game character. This is the evolution of them from cute doodle in 2020 on the left side there to the final asset that got used in the game on the far right-hand side. This is all from our lead artist, Chris, and you can see Desta sort of progressively getting kind of cool. We have some really good little looks here. Some of them are a bit like interesting. The one at the top there is very like surreal before we finally centered on this final character here. So that's what Desta looks like as a piece of art, but who is Desta as a person? We decided that we wanted to make Desta quite complex and unique, and so these are just 4 things I'm going to call out about Desta, their personality. They are someone who's non-binary. They are also Afro-Caribbean. They're from Manchester, making them a Mancunian, and they're also pansexual. And as a member of all of these different groups, some of which are super underrepresented, this character became very intersectional. And the decision to do this, obviously, you might be thinking, it sounds like you're setting yourselves up to potentially upset a lot of different groups of people in horrible ways. And you might be thinking to yourselves, why would you even create a character like this? Why don't you just go like a safe route, just make it a white dude with a bald head who's angry about something, and you'd be really cool. And my answer to this question will be a bit of a belligerent, well, why not? Why shouldn't we make characters like this? You've got to break many eggs to make a cake or omelette or any other egg-based food. So you got to start somewhere, right? And I think for anyone who's still using Twitter, there's been a bit of a pushback about a popular Japanese RPG series. There's a new installment coming out, and they've sort of really doubled down on making it very European. And as a result, a lot of their fans who are not of European heritage are a bit upset because the devs have basically said, don't expect to see any people of color in this game. Sorry, this is just how the world is, which I think is also historically inaccurate. But it's just a big shame, and you don't want to like disappoint people in that level, you know? But also as a sort of more serious answer, a bit less belligerent, one of our values as a studio is to make games accessible and open to everyone. Part of that is about accessibility. A lot of our games being on mobile have meant they've been playable with like one hand, which is really, really good to help people who may have physical impairments play. We also try to make them as accessible in terms of not being very text heavy. We don't require like high levels of games literacy or like Twitch-based gameplay movements to play the games. And also just the approachability of our games. We try to make our games not look like games. We try to trick people into becoming addicted to games, which is quite nice. And representation is also another thing we try and do. Just the first time someone sees themselves in a game, suddenly this whole world of games opens up to them. They're like, oh, I didn't think games were for me, but actually, maybe they are, which is quite nice. And so, yeah, with that in mind, that doesn't necessarily give you some sort of moral high ground. You can't just now be, well, I'm kind of woke, so I think I can just start telling all these stories and stuff, and like, that's going to be cool. It can be problematic to do that. I don't want to call out anyone, but I believe there's another game that was made heavily inspired by martial arts films from Hong Kong. And when that came out, a lot of people were like, it doesn't seem like we spoke to anyone from Hong Kong during the development of this game, which is a shame. It just seems like they could have done their due diligence and things would have gone a bit better for them. So the question is, how do you do justice to all of these different elements of your story? Especially if you don't necessarily have lived experience of that, especially within your team. And to be honest, the answer is pretty straightforward. It's pretty basic. You ask. And never forget, when we ask, we don't just ask. We do a few other things. This is the worst joke I've ever written in my life. First of all, you ask. That is true. You do ask when you ask, but then you ask someone. Not just someone who knows. That's what ask means, okay? You ask someone who knows, and you also, I told you it's really bad. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm glad people enjoyed that. You also pay them. That's probably the most important part of this whole thing. You find people who fill the blanks, fill the gaps in your knowledge, give them money, thank them for their services, pay them for their time, and you can work through stuff. So with that, I'm basically going to go through that bullet-pointed list of all the things that make Desta who they are and tell you like how we approached each bit, things we learned, mistakes we made, how we tried to correct those, and then see how he's sort of developed this character, even though we didn't necessarily have that just on hand on the team from the get-go. So I'm going to have a quick sip of water because my mouth is getting dry. So starting with Desta as a non-binary person. This was probably the area of Desta's character where we felt the most out of our depth. We didn't have anyone on the project team who had a non-binary gender identity. We did have colleagues in the company, but for this particular role, we needed someone who could write a main character whose lived experience was that of a non-binary person. And so we asked, we put out this job role, we put it up, and something you might notice at the beginning is it's remote. We basically tried to cast the net as far and as wide as possible, because even when it comes to intersectionality, that also affects like your hires. Maybe you want to hire a person who's a non-binary writer, but also is like experienced and you like them in the interviews and they want to work with you, and there's all these other things that can sort of keep making the pool get smaller. So we did everything we could to sort of increase the size of the pool. So we made it remote. In that first paragraph, you'll see that we actually even were open to people who were not from the games industry, because it was really more important that you could weave stories and your life experience was of a person who's non-binary. And it also just sort of gave an explicit shout out in the job post just to say it's a non-binary protagonist. And so we just got a bunch of people applying for the role, interviewed several of them, and eventually Ro joins the battle. So this is Ro. Ro's an amazing writer who's worked at Telltale Games, Riot Games, and most recently is the lead narrative designer at Sprocket Games. Our game director, Danny, up to this point had been writing most of the stuff of the game, but he's not a professional writer, so it was really helpful having someone who could then view all the work we'd done up to that point through that lens of being non-binary and just check it like, that's not how things go, or bits and bobs like that. And Ro also helped us do a bunch of workshops where we developed the character of Desta and think about how we wanted them to be presented in this game. And this is something we all agreed on as a team of leads. We wanted Desta to be a multifaceted person who just sort of kind of happened to be non-binary. We didn't want to make that like a main part of the story. It's not a focal point. I know personally as a black man, I don't like when any stories centering black people have to do with like slavery or oppression, because like it is part of the story, but it would be nice to sometimes just be like, yeah, he just happened to be black and he didn't actually have a problem with that. That wasn't the issue. The other issue was like his landlord was a horrible person or something, It's nice to just sort of have a bit of variety and depth. So we did a bunch of workshops. We were like really on board with this idea. We were like, yeah, let's do this. This is going to be awesome. We're going to sort of like just say like, oh, by the way, Desta's non-binary, and just tell this cool story. That led to a problem. It was pretty bad, and it happened pretty quickly, and it happened all the time, and that was misgendering. So we thought we could just tell a story of a non-binary person, and I guess in our minds we lived in some sort of utopia where just that would be cool, and everyone would just understand that, and it would just be cool, and we could just go ahead. But this happened within the team. It happened when we play-tested players. It happened when we shared things with the media. Even when the blurb explicitly said non-binary, they would always use female-coded language to describe the character of Desta. It was a bit of a revelation for those of us who've never been misgendered. We were like, this actually feels really bad, and it's really annoying, and we need to stop this. And so we thought of what I believe to be an effective and simple solution. It was just to add on every dialogue screen just the speaking character's pronouns. It was quick and easy. We popped it in. Kind of worked. Sadly, some people on the internet were unhappy with this and called us like SJW woke losers or whatever, but don't worry about those people. You're not talking to those people. Think about the people who do it. And yeah, it kind of worked. It was like not a problem until it was a bit of a problem because a lot of languages are inherently gendered. Like the Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, like they arbitrarily assign male or female characteristics to like inanimate objects. And we've written this script where we're referring to someone as they, them all the time. And they were like, well, they have to be male or female. There's no other types of gender, right? And Desta was a game that was going to be playable in 15 different languages, including English. So we were like, okay, how do we get these pronouns to work in all the languages and really convey the story that we're telling in English, which we are able to do quite well in all these other languages? And before I go to the next slide, shout out to Turkish and some of the Eastern Asian languages because they are just gender neutral by default, and it makes your life really easy. So good Joe in there. So yeah, maybe you can work out what we did here. We found people who knew what to do, and we gave them money to help us. So we were fortunate enough to partner with Netflix on the development of this game, and Netflix were actually like super duper accommodating. They really liked the story we're telling, and they had their own internal resource on using inclusive language. As well as that, they partnered us up with keyword studios. Anyone familiar with keywords? I find it very difficult for you to be in games and not have encountered keywords at some point. They basically offer every development service you can imagine for any thing you need to do with games, translation, QA, community support, all the stuff. So we got put in touch with an amazing team of linguists there at Keywords who helped us immensely. And at the top there, you can see that's how pronouns, non-gender pronouns are showed in German. Italian is a bit longer, a bit more wordy, but this language is constantly evolving and getting a bit shorter. But this is the version we've gone with, and I think they've even sent us an updated version of these pronouns we could put in. But it's really good. But now we sort of felt like we had solved the issue of people not understanding that Desta was non-binary. That left us with a bit of an elephant in the room, because previously we didn't want to call out the fact that Desta was non-binary, but now we've had to do all this work because we found out that when you don't do that, people will assume their gender and get it wrong, and it feels really bad. And so we thought that maybe we did need to address this somewhere in the story of the game. Like we literally, the whole team had just got first-hand experience of what it feels like to be misgendered. It felt like we would be doing a disservice to any of our players who may be non-binary, who will experience being misgendered all the time, to not reflect that in the game. And so we created a character in the story whose main conflict with Desta is that they were ignorant of Desta's non-binary identity. And the way we present this character is not as someone who's inherently evil or bigoted. It's just someone who's a bit behind the times. Desta would still consider this person a friend, but just hasn't quite found a way to break it to them, come out to them, I guess, in a way. But we knew doing something like this could also be potentially triggering to players, especially non-binary players who experience this on a regular basis. So we decided to just add a simple content warning, just basically saying, look, Lee's chapter contains themes of being misgendered. If you wouldn't like to see that, we've written some alternative dialogue for you. If you're cool with it, you can go ahead with that, but you can change it at any time. It doesn't affect the game in any way, but it's up to you to choose if you'd like to do that. And that's sort of how we close the loop on trying one approach at explaining a non-binary character and then going back to just sort of making some tweaks and refinements. And that's kind of the end of the non-binary bit for now. Now, as for Desta as a Mancunian, I'm going to have another moment to take a sip of water. Also, I hope you're drinking water as well. Anyone? Drink some. Have some. So, our game director, Danny, does happen to be from Manchester, and that's quite a big reason why Desta's from Manchester, but also On the team, we are quite bored of things being set in England, always being very London-centric. I mean, a lot of our team members aren't even from the UK, so they have no attraction or love with London that much, so it's a bit boring, and we wanted to just have, again, that lived experience on the team meant that Danny could sort of really go in and be like, oh yeah, that wouldn't look like that, or people wouldn't talk like that, and slang, and how the setting of the game might work. So we got him in, but again, Danny's not a professional writer. He's quite good, but as the game director, he has a lot of other things he needs to worry about, like the audio of the game, and the visuals, and the gameplay itself. He can't be focused entirely on the narrative, so fortunately, there was someone who we were already in touch with, and we were just waiting for the right moment to collaborate. And so Jenny joins the battle. So this is Jenny Kong. She's a writer and director. She has worked at companies like That Game Company on Sky Children of the Light. And she also happens to be from Warrington in Cheshire, which, as you can see, is not that far away from Manchester. So now we've bolstered our writing team with 2 people from the north of England with a sort of shared life experience that they could sort of spitball back and forth and be like, okay, what sort of slang might these people use? Where did you hang out when you were like in your early 20s, Danny? Oh, cool, yeah. And they could really bring these characters to life. And so like the characters, the game's super northern, by the way. You should all play it. It's really, really good. And we kind of were able to do justice to these elements. But that then, remember we did some localization. We did the game in 15 languages, right? Led to this problem with trying to localize some of this regional dialect. So we wanted to try and convey the fact that these characters were not from London and like they were from a different part of the UK. And so the linguistics team, they're really good at this. You'll soon see that apparently they're a bit too good at this, but they managed to sort of just use like different accents from different countries. So the German translators, I think they were like, we're not going to take like the Berlin accent, we'll take a different, smaller city somewhere else and try and use that. Which led to a problem, specifically in Japanese. So we got this tweet from one of our players. It says like, hi, playing it with Japanese subtitles. I really love it, but please consider changing the subtitles from Kansai dialect to standard Japanese. Kansai dialect is common in Japan, but reading it in written words is very hard, especially for a person like me who's not from the Kansai region. So I think our team basically wrote it as if everyone was from Osaka, and I think there's a lot of slang I think is very punishing on the eyes if you're a Japanese reader, because I think that's normally heard as opposed to read, but that's like a little thing we're aware of. Sorry, Japanese player, but yeah, our team did a good job. I'm proud of them for being a bit too good. And that's kind of the Manchester aspects wrapped up. Now, as pansexual, Desta as someone who's pansexual, again, this was an area of the project where we didn't have the lived experience within the team. Can you guess what we did? We asked people, gave them money to help us. So we partnered with an organization called More Diverse Voices. And they basically went through the game, viewing it from this LGBTQIA plus lens, and sort of let us know if we were doing anything really badly, anything really well. Largely, we did pretty well because we just treated everyone as just, as a human, and that was the main thing that you need to get across. This process also helped us understand a bit more about what it is, in fact, to be non-binary. Up to this point, I'll admit, I thought non-binary was just you were either like male, female, non-binary, but non-binary itself is actually an umbrella, and there's a bunch of different terms under there, and so Desta falls under agender, but there's also like gender fluid, demigirl, androgynous, and a lot of bits like that, which I was just ignorant of, but I'm happy that we did this process and I was able to learn more myself. This process also prepared us for how we would communicate about the game externally and make sure we were like saying the right things and letting people know how like inclusive the game was. And it also prepared us for dealing with trolls, which was quite nice. And basically just ignore them, no big secret. Don't engage. And that was that. So I'm going to have a sip of water again. And this is Desta as an Afro-Caribbean. This area was fun. This felt like it was my time to shine because my parents are both from Jamaica. They moved over here many decades ago. You're going to notice a trend here. Danny's partner, family, is all from Guyana, and that's why Desta's from Guyana, pretty much, because Danny was spending a lot of time at the family home and seeing how like the family dynamics played out, and it was really cool to sort of just say, I'm from Jamaica, you're from Guyana, let's see what similarities there are, and see like the common threads, one of which is like food culture, music, respecting your parents, things like that, all really important things. And so we added these items to the game. They serve like a gameplay purpose, but they're also sort of things that have some sort of significance to Desta. Stuff such as pepper sauce. Now, pepper sauce, in my opinion, is a staple in every Caribbean household. Each island sort of has its own pepper. I think Scotch bonnet is basically everyone's pepper, but also we Jamaicans try and claim that as ours. Who was that? Yeah, that's good. And so, yeah, no pun intended, but adding things like this to the game just added a bit more flavor. Like, we're not sort of making it, like, really obvious, like, Desta's not walking around saying, like, slang or anything, like, in an accent, but you can just sort of get more of an insight into Desta as a character and, like, things that make them who they are. So, yeah, this item gives looks. What does this do, actually? I don't think I've ever actually used this in the game, but I just liked coming up with it. We've also got things like cocoa butter. Anyone has any friends who are Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean, black friends? You know we're very moisturized. We don't like to be ashy. And like, yeah, as well as showing like the gameplay effects of the item, it also has a little blurb from Desta's point of view explaining what this item means to them. And this one is like in relation to James, who is their friend who always wears shorts. And it was like, James didn't even know about lotion until he started hanging out with us. Wearing shorts all day, that guy needed some help. So that just conjures that image of James with his very ashy knees that just need a bit of love, you know? And just little bits like that. So yeah, please, everyone, stay moisturized. You probably don't need to worry about that because it is very wet and rainy outside anyway. So you don't really have much of a choice. And another thing we discussed was just sort of the family dynamics. So the main aim of the game is to sort of work your way through all these conflicts and resolve them until you get to the final one where you basically confront your mum. And I know as a person with Caribbean parents, like there are certain things you can't say to your parents, or you really need to like build up a lot of courage to sometimes say what's on your mind to parents like this. Not to say that they're bad, but when I was younger, you might have got a slipper or a belt, that's all. And so we wanted to make it feel really realistic, and one thing we realized is that one of the initial drafts of the game, something Desta said, we read that and we were like, there's no chance that anyone would ever risk saying something like this to their parents. So we had to dial it back a bit and make it a bit more normal. And yeah, after going through this process, we felt like we sort of had a nice rounded character. Like Desta had all these different elements going for them. We sort of did our due diligence. We tried some stuff out, found out what worked, what didn't work, made adjustments, tested that out again. We're happy with it. And then we were like, okay, cool, let's do this. This should be easy. Let's find ourselves a voiceover artist to bring the character of Desta to life. Quick heads up. If you want to do voiceover for a character that has so much going for them, you might find it a bit difficult. Because we were basically saying, like, can you get us someone who is literally Desta? And they were like, we're not sure, because now we need someone who's hitting all those key points, but is also like a professional voiceover artist, but is also available, and we like their voice, and we want to work with them, and they're available, and we want them. And it sort of became a bit bonkers to manage. So we were fortunate enough to have the time to leave that casting open a bit longer until we did at least eventually get someone who fit for us, like our non-negotiables. They had to be from Manchester, had to be Afro-Caribbean, had to be non-binary, and we were like, we'll forgive the other things. So we were able to do that. As a producer, I can sympathize that that's not always going to be possible. You don't have unlimited money, you don't have unlimited time, but if you just are thinking of doing something like this with a very kind of nuanced character, just work out like where you'd be happy making that compromise, and then if you need to, like adjust the story accordingly. Should be cool. And now Desta's not the only character in the game. That'll be a very weird game. Here's our supporting cast. And our cast is, I like to think, quite diverse, because people in the real world are diverse. That's how we see the world, and we want to reflect that back into the products we make. And so here you'll see, after I take a quick sip of water, you'll see characters with different body types. We've got Son on the left, who's a bit of a stockier, a bit of a more built lad. You know, he might shop at Giacomo, for example. A bigger guy. We've got people of different ethnicities, ages. Miss K, I believe, is the oldest character we've ever kind of made in one of our games who's playable. We've got ages, sexualities, religions. The art team. Now I look at this slide, the art team will be so mad at me because I'm sure I've scaled everyone up wrong. But I know that Son is, like, he's the biggest one. And again, like, even though I've mentioned all these things that make these characters different, none of those are the most interesting thing about them. The main focus is always on their relationships with Desta, how they interact, what they mean to Desta. On this screen, we're seeing, like, love interests. We're seeing Desta's old art teacher, best friends, and stuff like that, and including Lee, who the misgenderer. But he's a cool guy anyway. So what's next? So yeah, once we had all that together, we moved on for some testing. We started making a build of the game. once we felt that we had enough of the story together and enough of the mechanics together, we sort of opened up a private test. We opened out to our friends, family, the Pock and Play community on Discord as well. And we're sort of like, does anyone have a quick little look at this game? Let us know what you think. And so this build just let players play through the first 3 encounters normally, and then it basically you could kind of just skip through and just meet all the other characters and see what you made of them pretty much. And through this process, we got a bunch of feedback. One piece of feedback in particular knocked us for 6, for lack of a better term, and I'd like to share that one with you all now. And this piece of feedback, I've shortened it because it was even longer and more emotive, but I don't want to cry reading out, so I made it a bit shorter. This question was, who's your favorite character in the game and why? I'll read it out for you. So it's Desta, because they are so beautiful and their experience mirrors what I had to go through. I'm a queer immigrant person of color who had to deal with a complex family life and many phases of peer conflict. Though not one-to-one, Desta captures much of my lived experience very well and with what feels like deep respect and care. Thank you. And so you could probably imagine how we felt. And if that's not perfect example of why you would want to try and even attempt to tell something like this, I don't know what is. We read that and we were just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe. All the stuff we had gone through and all the stuff I mentioned earlier, that wasn't happening in sequence. I've just done that for the slideshow. It was happening all at the same time. It was a bit chaotic. We were like, oh my gosh, is this going to all come together at the end? So to have something like this was just, it's vindication, the definition of it. It was amazing. And so with that, folks, I'd like you to take these things home with you. First of all, don't be afraid. I think there's a lot of people who are afraid to engage with things that are not necessarily their lived experience, but you can appreciate other things, appreciate other cultures, other ways of life. It's all good. Does anyone remember that it was actually Black History Month last month? Does anyone put anything out from their socials? Is that because maybe you didn't have black employees and you didn't know how to engage with it? Because then you're not, in turn, going to get black employees wanting to apply because they'll think that you're not engaging with the material and you get into this sort of vicious cycle. So sometimes you've got to just, as I say, break the eggs, get the egg-based foods made and just give it a go. Another thing, just when in doubt, ask and pay. It's a simple thing, you can use it. We used it and we got that lovely bit of feedback after going through the process, so it does work. And the main thing, I guess, is that you can help give someone the gift of representation, and that's priceless, because I don't know if that person who gave us that feedback's like, I might get into games now, and they might just now become the new Miyamoto. Whatever. They might be, they might make a big impact on the games industry in some way. You never know. That's kind of all I've got prepared for you all. Thanks for listening. Peace. Here's my socials. And this is a cheeky one, but we're also hiring, by the way, so if you're a programmer, if you're a designer, if you want to join us, please come. Please join. You get to work with that woman over there. Jennifer, raise your hand. Talk to her about the project. And yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks, peace. Thanks, everybody.
We have time for a few questions, if anyone would like to raise a hand.
A great talk. I'm a big fan of the game. I play on my phone, Monument Valley. I especially like the design of the, because I'm inspired by a similar type of design style, illusion, like the Penrose triangle type of thing. Who got that inspiration to create the platform based on that design? And why did you pick that type of design?
Specifically for Monument Valley? It was our lead artist and designer, Ken Wong. He was super inspired by MC Escher, Roger Penrose, as you mentioned, and he created a piece of concept art, which was just it was similar to the stairs that went infinitely, and we just thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could walk on that? What would that be like? And so him and Manish Mystery, one of our programmers, built the first prototype back in 2013, I think. And the rest is history, I guess. It immediately worked as soon as you could go up and down it, once they worked out how to do that in code, and then we just started building and just took inspiration from all sorts of different architecture and cultures from around the world.
Any more hands? I can see one there. Can I pass the mic down?
Hi. That was a really wonderful talk. Thank you so much. This is stuff we'd love to do more of. You mentioned more diverse voices. Is there anywhere else that's a good place to look or start asking in terms of, people that understand this more than me, a white woman?
There are, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I have my laptop with me, and I can go through my emails and show you all the people we contacted, if you don't mind coming down later, and I can just show you. But yeah, there's loads of people. They'll take your money gladly. They'll tell you everything you need to know. You can get in touch with Pock and Play as well, right, Des? Yeah, little plug.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Oh, yep.
When you're trying to focus on the intersectionality bit and the fact they just happen to be non-binary and they just happen to be Afro-Caribbean, what challenges do you find trying to keep all those in the mix as you write the narrative?
That's a good question. Remember, I'm a producer, not the writer, so I probably am not the best equipped to answer this. But honestly, we just try and make it like just any sort of real person you ever met. Like, I'm sure everyone on Earth has so much going for them, but it's never just one of those things that makes them who they are. It's always a blend. Everyone's just a big mismatch. Is that the word? That's not a word. But everyone's a big hodgepodge. Is that a word? Of all these different things. I guess the main thing to look out for is just make sure you're not going into any sort of weird negative stereotypes about any of those groups. I think as long as you avoid that, not to say that there can't be people who are from underrepresented groups who are just not nice people, but say if people are constantly vilified for certain things, it wouldn't be a good idea to also make them like an antagonist in your story who also is like, brown or something. That's probably a no-go. But yeah, I think just be sensitive to it. And again, find people and pay them to like review your stuff if you have any doubts, and I'm sure you'll be fine.
Loris, thanks.
I'm going to have to run around. Sorry, everyone. So don't worry about this bit. If you're thinking it's awkward, you're wrong.
Thank you. A wonderful talk, first of all. And so you've talked about everything that happened, possibly went wrong, possibly went right, and all of that. You've not talked about compromises. Were there any compromises that happened as you guys were making Desta? What were the biggest compromises? And second part, what was the strangest compromise that you guys had to make?
There's something in my mind, and it's I didn't follow my own advice of asking people and paying to them. One of the characters in the assemble cast, the supporting casting, has a disability, and I think we overlooked the fact that we should have checked that with someone. I don't know if it's a compromise, but basically we then just sort of said we dialed back quite a bit on how much that affected them as a character. We basically made them very superficially disabled, and I think that's a mistake we made and we should fix it. But I think, the compromise there was that we just sort of said, don't reference the disability at all, because now we've not actually checked that that's how things go. And I guess the others, it's not necessarily a compromise. I mean, there's a weird thing that happened. When we started doing the art, the game looked way too London-y, and we had an internal philosophy of everything needs to look less Winchester, more Manchester. And so we changed, every piece of art got changed. So I think maybe that was a bit of a compromise. Actually, no, the strangest compromise it's a bit of a gameplay-related one and art-related. When Desta had these confrontations with the characters that you saw, the world was meant to evolve and change each time you saw them. So for example, when they encountered their art teacher, every time they would talk to them, the world would become more and more like the art classroom where they met each other. And this is only a compromise because of production reasons. We found that this was taking too long, and people didn't even actually notice when it was changing. So we just took that out because it was silly.
That sounds so much like art, though. Let's make everything evolve, and as design, you're just I love that, but also can we do it? Oh,
yeah.
God.
I mean, the game originally was way more surreal. Sort of melty clock, sort of super stuff, and then we realized that just it didn't mesh at all. So actually, maybe that's the biggest compromise. Actually, we changed the art style about 6 times over development, over 2 years. Yeah, sorry, Chris. Yeah, he did a good job. He came with something that we all agreed on at the end, but yeah, it took a lot out of Chris to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One more question, if there is a hand. I can see a hand.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting point. Sorry, this feels very loud. I thought it was a really interesting point to take the misgendering and turn that into a plot point. I'm just curious how you made the judgment of how far to go with that, because obviously it could become a very large part of the story. How did you judge how far you should go with it?
It was a bit of a gut feel, to be honest. We made this particular character say weird, old, dated language like tomboy, which we felt sort of cushioned the blow a little bit. We didn't have them just sort of say like she, daughter, or anything like that. We just made them use sort of like weird, kind of archaic language. So he was sort of like, this character's a bit of a clown, and made him almost, not a clown, but he's sort of a bit of like a lighter sort of, he's just a bit of a buffoon. He's sort of a lovable fool, and I think that's the way we addressed that. We sort of made this character like, as I say, like not someone who you hate. He's not a bigot. He's not like right wing, like watching GB News kind of character. He's just like, he's a bit ignorant. He's a bit behind on the times, and yeah, that's kind of how we did it. Made him someone who you wouldn't just immediately hate. We didn't just make him like the devil incarnate. He's like a nice person, and like all the other characters in the game, he's just got his flaws. No one's perfect, and sort of tried to be a bit like sympathetic to the fact that he hasn't learnt this yet, and we shouldn't be maybe so strict on him.
Please join me in thanking Mike Anderson.